Okay kids, now here we are at the Scientology slave exhibit. As you can see, the slaves were crammed onto buses where they were taken to the main prison camp known as the Int Base, where they were forced to work for no pay.
Any waking hour was spent working.
Many of these slaves were young children who spent their days doing manual labor in the hot desert sun. They could never see their parents and they were deprived of any education.
Adults, foreign nationals are kept there, basically held prisoner.
From the age of 6 to 12, Jenna lived here.
I lived in the garage for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years.
When I was 12 until I was 18, I saw my mom 2 times.
A place where children and adults are said to be punished.
Child abuse.
Child labor.
Absolutely.
Child being enslaved.
It was like 6:30, wake up.
It was like in a prison. Someone come in, time to get up, security guard, 10 minutes, wash, dress, and then you're outside standing.
We lived in dormitories, and I would only see my parents once a week.
The compound where they were held was surrounded by a double barbed wire fence. And as a punishment, some of the slaves were sent to a place called the Hole, where they were treated like animals.
The entire property is surrounded by large, high fences with razor barbed wire atop every single fence, with security cameras, high-powered floodlights, motion detectors every 10 feet on the fence.
Absolutely not physically possible. You couldn't make it past security. The windows were barred.
They worked all day long, scrubbing toilet bowls with toothbrushes and digging holes in human waste.
Punishment program and have compared it to a labor camp.
You work there, you live there, you never leave.
The head slave master was named David Miscavige. He lured in celebrities and used them to gain power and protection.
He is famously close with the world's best-known Scientologist, Tom Cruise.
The most dedicated Scientologist I know.
Miscavige is known to be a volatile, demanding leader.
If anyone dared to escape the prison camp, he would take any means necessary to stop them.
They count you just like they do in jail. They count how many people are there, make sure no one is missing.
The staff that do manage to escape are hunted down like animals and recovered.
Because everyone had rifles, semi-automatic, fully automatic rifles.
In 2010, the FBI began an investigation on David Miscavige for human trafficking.
Trafficking investigators for the FBI. The agents spent more than a year examining conditions at Scientology's California compound, including the Hole.
He was very cruel to the slaves, and he beat them when they did not live up to his satisfaction.
Beatings and humiliations carried out by the leader of the Church of Scientology.
David Miscavige actually physically strike other staff members.
There was a beating every day.
And then they were beaten?
Yes, they were beaten.
Like slaves in a slave camp and literally beats them down?
Were you used to, in your life, getting beaten up? Was that something you were used to?
No, never.
And you were a 40-something-year-old woman.
To many things that I'll never, ever be able to erase from my mind.
Miscavige found particular pleasure in abusing women and young children.
I never agreed to have an abortion.
In some cases, sometimes you're made to stand in a trash can and water's poured over you.
That happened to you?
Yes.
Now, before we continue, are there any questions?
So he's in jail now, right?
This is the program the Scientologists didn't want you to see. They've done all they can to stop it. Why? Because the big story has secretly filmed inside the cult to reveal its bizarre mind control techniques. This man is talking to an ashtray.
This 1995 Carlton television documentary on the Church of Scientology provided a rare glimpse into the inner workings of the church through the use of hidden cameras. Watching it, we were left wondering if even half of what has been said about the Church of Scientology is true. Its manipulative practices and the way it charges up front for all services, clearly showing it to be a commercial enterprise. Why is it still allowed to operate with a tax-exempt religious status in the U.S.? Something is wrong with this picture. Researching it, we realized that far more was wrong than we ever would have thought. What we found was a global pattern of unimaginable abuse and protection of the abusers at the highest levels of governments around the world. This is a story you will likely want to believe is not true, but the evidence for it cannot be easily dismissed. It is a story that will give you a glimpse into the inner workings of more than just Scientology, a glimpse at things that hidden cameras alone won't show you.
So is Scientology a harmless fringe religion, or is it a sinister sect that controls the minds of its members?
This is one of the keys to understanding what Scientology is really all about: mind control. Mind control techniques figure prominently throughout the entire Scientology curriculum, and these techniques bear a striking resemblance to those developed by the CIA around the same time that Scientology emerged, as shown in publications like the now declassified Kubark Counterintelligence Interrogation Manual. Kubark is a CIA codename for the CIA itself. Specifically, the process of Scientology auditing is strangely similar to Kubark Counterintelligence Interrogation.
You and a friend will team up together and follow the basic steps of the procedure. This is called auditing, and any two reasonably intelligent people can do it. The term auditing comes from a word which means to listen.
Kubark interrogation begins with eliciting, defined as obtaining information without revealing intent or exceptional interest through a verbal or written exchange.
On Poole High Street, she's approached within minutes by a young man with a clipboard.
Look, question. If you could be anything in life, what would you most like to be?
Explorer.
Claiming to promote a book, the young man persuades Ali to go with him to his office to complete a survey. It's 40 minutes before he admits he works for the Scientologists. This is how most people are recruited into Scientology, but they don't know the true beginnings of this so-called science of the mind.
Kubark defines the use of polygraphs in interrogation as an aid in the psychological assessment of sources, similar to Scientology's use of the E-meter, which is nothing more than a crude form of polygraph.
And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch you. And I want you to just watch and see what the needle does when I pinch you. Just note it, okay?
Okay.
Watch. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, good. Just run through.
The E-meter, they believe, helps you uncover repressed thoughts. It didn't take Marty long to find a naughty thought of mine.
Scientology literature is filled with code names and acronyms to a degree that is only common in intelligence documents like the Kubark Counterintelligence Manual. And some of the Scientology training routines seem to even be developed directly from the Kubark Manual. The Scientology training routine TR1 is called Dear Alice. In this training routine, the student is directed to read random phrases from Lewis Carroll's book Alice in Wonderland without showing any reaction to the bizarreness of it. In the Kubark Manual, a confusion interrogation technique is described, entitled Alice in Wonderland. Of course, none of this provides proof that the principles of Dianetics and Scientology are based on CIA counterintelligence techniques, but it does provide evidence that L. Ron Hubbard was both aware of these techniques and willing to use them to gain control and power over others. Notice, for example, how Hubbard echoes the Kubark Manual, which states that detention in a controlled environment and perhaps for a lengthy period is frequently essential to a successful counterintelligence interrogation of a recalcitrant source.
Now, I want to give you just a little rundown on what you're walking into. It's too late for you to leave. I mean, you're enrolled. You know, it's quite customary for somebody to say, well, if you don't like this, you're here on your self-determinism and all that sort of thing, and you don't like this, why, it's volunteer, you know, and you can leave and so, well, we don't do that around here. You're in, you're done. So, we just close the gates right at that point.
There are countless descriptions of Scientology's use of hypnosis and mind control techniques from a large number of ex-Scientologists, many from the upper echelons of the organization.
Let us begin this half hour with the secretive and controversial Church of Scientology. In a moment, a defector from that church's leadership corps will speak out in an exclusive live interview.
Behind me is the ornate world headquarters of the Church of Scientology. This morning, a member is breaking ranks and silence and telling stories of finances, abortions, and mind control.
Now, Hubbard, as I said, was getting more and more insane. He formed, I could see a Nazi cult forming.
And that's what they do to people. They take their private confessional folders, and they'll take anything they've confessed to, and they'll use it to try to shut them up.
The totalitarian leader of this paramilitary cult lives there in an armored building and often travels in an armored car.
With copyrighted policies of terror and psychoterror.
Former official spokesman and head of the Office of Special Affairs has left, bringing its secrets with him.
People are not able to think for themselves, where they really are being suppressed, where they're being abused.
Because the problem is the government isn't doing anything about these abuses, which have been systematic and they've been going on for decades.
I was speaking about the child Dianetics, the philosophy of L. Ron Hubbard, that children aren't actually children, but they're billion-year-old beings occupying smaller bodies than the rest of us, and they should be responsible for just as much as the rest of us, and this sort of madness.
She is one of Scientology's top global leaders, part of the inner circle, a confidant to its top stars. Now we can reveal she has been accused of covering up child sex abuse.
I was introduced to Scientology when I was 2 years old. I eventually went to their boarding schools in the desert of California. You're under watch. You undergo daily interrogations with their version of a lie detector.
As far as I understand, one of the major purposes of a government is to protect the people. And Scientology is, in my opinion, quite dangerous.
But what none of these critiques and exposés examines is the social and political condition in which Scientology began.
Let's get my relationship to this completely straight. So on. I am the writer of the textbooks of Scientology. About 2.5 years ago or so, I even ceased to be a director of organizations. The government, in the first place, I am not.
L. Ron Hubbard's self-help book, Dianetics, was first published in 1950, out of which grew the first Church of Scientology, incorporated in New Jersey in December of 1953. The California Scientology Church would follow 2 months later, in February of 1954. With its claims of using newly discovered technology and methods to fix humanity and help people develop greater powers of mind, it can be seen as the first step of a movement that was about to explode on the scene in the U.S., the Human Potential Movement. And at precisely the same time that the Human Potential Movement was beginning to form in the 1950s, the CIA began Project MK-Ultra, in an effort to discover mind control techniques by subjecting mental health patients to electroshock therapy, various forms of torture and abuse, and drugs, such as LSD.
Using unknowing Canadian citizens as test subjects, Cameron had developed a new procedure which caught the eye of the MK-Ultra researchers, as well as the Canadian intelligence community. He was hired by the CIA and the Canadian government to further explore the treatment, which he called psychic driving.
First, Cameron proposed that they would use intensive electroshock and LSD and other disorienting drugs to, in his terms, de-pattern individuals, basically to wipe the slate clean.
The 60s would see the Human Potential Movement come to fruition, adopting methods of mind expansion that involved the use of the same drugs the CIA was using for mind control in MK-Ultra. The widespread use of LSD in the Human Potential Movement can be traced back to one man who coincidentally also had the last name Hubbard and who, like L. Ron Hubbard, was fixated on an image of himself as a ship's captain. Alfred Matthew Hubbard. Like L. Ron Hubbard, Alfred Hubbard had a tendency to make grandiose claims about himself and his past, such as an alleged angelic vision as a young boy in which he was given the secret to building a radioactive battery, a virtual free energy device. A similar angelic vision would inspire him to introduce leaders and social visionaries around the world to LSD, earning him the nickname the Johnny Appleseed of LSD. Alfred Hubbard gave LSD to leading scientists, politicians, artists, writers, and even church officials. What was not widely known at the time was that Alfred Hubbard was a former OSS agent and likely current CIA agent, who at the very least corresponded with MK-Ultra mind control researchers. By some accounts, Alfred Hubbard personally administered LSD to as many as 6,000 people around the world. Amongst them were Timothy Leary, who would encourage the youth of America to turn on, tune in, and drop out, and the author of Brave New World, Aldous Huxley. Ironically, Huxley, whose book Brave New World envisioned a dystopian future of slavery of the masses through the administration of a state-produced drug called Soma, the effects of which are uncannily similar to LSD, would become the inspiration for the widespread use of LSD in the human potential movement. The use of LSD then spread into the streets of America's cities, providing an often bizarre sideshow that distracted mainstream attention away from the civil rights movement and left much of America's youth burnt out and brain damaged, working directly against the stated goals of increasing human potential.
The effects on the mind are explosively disruptive. The reaction to the drug is completely unpredictable. It can be the hoped-for heaven or a hell full of horror.
In a similar vein, the women's liberation movement of the 1960s was infiltrated and redirected by an admitted CIA asset named Gloria Steinem. Steinem spent years suppressing knowledge of her CIA connections, finally not only admitting them publicly, but taking pride in them. Steinem referred to her CIA work in Europe, informing on and disrupting youth movements, as the CIA's finest hour. In the 1970s, the next phase of so-called human potential research began with CIA funding of psychic phenomena such as remote viewing experiments conducted by Hal Puthoff and Ingo Swann at the Stanford Research Institute, or SRI. Alfred Hubbard was also employed by SRI, and perhaps coincidentally, Puthoff and Swann were both high-level Scientologists. It's clear that the CIA devoted considerable assets to disrupting any possibility of a true revolution in human potential in the 1960s and 70s.
CIA is a state-sponsored terrorist association. You don't look at people as human beings. They're nothing but pieces on the chessboard.
Secrecy in this work is essential. Achievements and triumphs can seldom be advertised. Shortcomings and failures often are advertised.
No one really knows all of the things that CIA does. They pretty much have carte blanche, and they have an enormous amount of money.
You know, maybe I'm overly naive, but I don't see what would be wrong with that.
Now, we need more intelligence, not less. We must not diminish our intelligence.
The CIA is not really an intelligence agency. It's a covert action agency.
The CIA has been involved in assassination and torture behind the scenes, all through its history.
The Cold War is over, but many new dangers have taken its place. The decisive advantage United States intelligence provides this country is therefore as important as it has ever been.